The day my son told me I wasn't invited to his wedding, my kettle screamed itself dry on the stove. I remember that sound more than his words, that sharp, angry whistle filling my little kitchen while I stood there holding the phone, my hand trembling, my mouth open but no sound coming out. I remember thinking, someone should turn that off, even as my heart quietly cracked in two. "Mom," he said gently, the way he used to when he was a boy asking for something he already knew would hurt me. "It's not my decision." I didn't ask whose it was. I already knew. I turned off the stove, poured the boiling water down the sink, and watched the steam rise like something leaving my body. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about my place in my own family and how easily it could be erased. Before all of this, my life was simple in the way quiet lives often are. Predictable, steady, built on routine and small comforts. I lived alone in the house my late husband and I had bought 32 years earlier. A modest 2-story place with peeling white paint and a fig tree out back that refused to die no matter how harsh the winter. Every morning I woke before the sun. I made tea the way my mother taught me, loose leaves, not bags, and sat at the small kitchen table by the window. I liked to watch the neighborhood come alive, the jogger with the limp, the old man walking his stubborn beagle, the school bus coughing its way down the street. My son, Daniel, was my only child. I raised him in that house. I still remembered the pencil marks on the pantry wall where I tracked his height, even though I'd painted over them years ago. He used to call every Sunday without fail, sometimes just to ask how to fix a leaky faucet or complain about work, sometimes just to hear my voice. When he told me he was engaged, I cried into my apron and burned the onions. I was happy for him, truly. He'd met his fiancée, Leela, at work. She was younger than him by nearly a decade, ambitious, polished, always dressed like she had somewhere better to be. The first time I met her, she smiled without showing her teeth. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp and quick, taking inventory of my home as if she were already imagining changes. She complimented my furniture, but her tone suggested it belonged in a museum rather than a living room. Still, I tried. God knows I tried. I invited her over for dinner. I learned her favorite wine. I listened while she talked, mostly about herself, her plans, her career, the life she envisioned. Daniel watched her the way people watch fireworks, dazzled and grateful all at once. When she corrected me, little things, like how I pronounced quinoa or how I folded napkins, I told myself it was nerves. When she insisted they'd be hosting holidays their way from now on, I smiled and said, "Of course, dear." I wanted peace more than pride. The wedding planning moved quickly, too quickly if I'm honest. Every time I asked a question about dates, venues, colors, Daniel would hesitate, then say, "We're still figuring things out." Leela stopped responding to my texts altogether. When I brought it up, Daniel said she was overwhelmed. Then came the phone call. He didn't even say hello properly. His voice was tight, rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "Lila thinks it's best if you don't attend the ceremony." I laughed at first, a soft, confused laugh that surprised even me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm his mother." There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background, the low hum of a city that didn't care about my heartbreaking. "She wants something intimate," he said. "No distractions." "Am I a distraction?" I asked. Silence. That was when he said it wasn't his decision. I didn't beg. I didn't yell. I told him I understood. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but I swallowed it anyway. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the ring my husband had given me all those years ago. I hadn't taken it off since he died. I told myself I would survive this too. The wedding came and went without me. I saw pictures on social media, Lila in white, Daniel smiling beside her, her parents front and center in every frame. I was not mentioned, not tagged, not acknowledged. The morning after, Lila called. Her voice was sweet, almost syrupy. "I hope you're not upset," she said, as if the thought had only just occurred to her. "We should talk soon, about the future." I agreed because I didn't yet know how to say no. She came over the following week, walked through my front door like she owned it, heels clicking against the old hardwood floors. She admired the space openly now, commenting on the light, the size of the rooms, the potential. "You must rattle around in here all alone," she said, glancing up the staircase. "It's a lot for one person." I offered her tea. She declined. That was when she asked, "Have you ever thought about signing the house over to us?" she said casually, crossing her legs. "For security, for family." I felt my chest tighten, but my face remained still. She talked about how expensive the city was, how Daniel deserved stability, how this house would be perfect for their future. She spoke as if my life here were already over, as if I were already packing. I nodded. I listened. I said nothing. Inside, something old and strong stirred awake. I had lost my invitation. I had lost my place at the table, but I had not lost my mind, and I was not finished yet. After Lila left that afternoon, the house felt different, quieter, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly. I stood at the front window long after her car pulled away, watching the fig tree sway in the breeze. My husband planted that tree the year Daniel was born. He used to joke that they grow up together, one rooted in soil, one in life. I made myself sit down. I placed both hands flat on the table, the way my mother used to when she was steadying herself before saying something hard. "Think," I told myself. "Just think." That night, Daniel called. His voice was lighter now, relieved, as if a weight had been lifted simply by his wife speaking her mind. "She didn't mean it like that, Mom," he said when I mentioned the house. "She just worries about our future." "And mine?" I asked quietly. Another pause, longer this time. "You'd always be taken care of," he said finally. "You know that." I did know that, or rather, I knew what people meant when they said it. I knew it usually meant on their terms, in someone else's spare room, with your belongings reduced to boxes labeled miscellaneous. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not yet." He sighed, the way people do when they think you're being difficult instead of careful. "Let's talk about it later." Later, I learned, is where people put things they hope will resolve themselves. Over the next few weeks, Lila became strangely attentive. She sent flowers for no reason. She asked about my health. She brought up the house again and again, but always gently now, like she was testing the ground before stepping. She even suggested we meet with a lawyer just to understand the options. I agreed. Not because I trusted her, but because I trusted myself. The lawyer's office smelt like leather and lemon polish. Lila did most of the talking, Daniel nodding beside her like a well-trained shadow. She spoke about estate planning, about minimizing complications, about keeping things within the family. I noticed the way she said family without looking at me. When the lawyer asked if I felt pressured, I smiled and said no. I said I just needed time. Time was something I still had. At home, I began preparing quietly. I gathered paperwork, deeds, bank statements, insurance policies. I hadn't looked at some of them in years. Seeing my husband's name printed beside mine brought a lump to my throat. I also started writing things down, Dates, conversations, little comments Lila made when she thought no one was listening. I wasn't building a case, I was building clarity. The more I listened, the clearer things became. Lila wasn't cruel, she was efficient. She believed in forward motion, in trimming excess, in removing obstacles, and somewhere along the way, I had become one. The next time she visited, she brought contracts. "I thought this might make things easier," she said, laying them out on the table like placemats. "Just preliminary." I didn't touch them. "You should read them," she added. "It's really for your benefit." I smiled at her. A real smile this time. Calm. Measured. "I will," I said, "in my own time." She watched me closely then, studying, measuring again. Daniel stayed quiet. That night, after they left, I walked through the house room by room. I touched the banister where Daniel slid down as a child. I opened the closet where my husband's coats still hung, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. I slept in the guest room, the one Leela had already referred to as my future space. In the morning, I called my own lawyer. She was a woman about my age, with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush me. I told her everything: the wedding, the house, the contracts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You're not being unreasonable. You're being wise." We talked about protections, about boundaries, about how love and legality don't always align. I left her office feeling lighter, not because the situation had improved, but because I finally understood it. A week later, I invited Daniel and Leela over for dinner. I cooked their favorites. I set the table properly. I wore the blue dress my husband liked, the one that made me feel like myself again. Leela arrived with a bottle of wine and a tight smile. Daniel hugged me longer than usual, as if he sensed something shifting beneath the surface. We ate. We talked about neutral things: work, weather, a neighbor's new dog. Then I stood up and cleared my plate. "I've thought about the house," I said. Leela's eyes lit up, just for a second. "And?" Daniel asked. "I've made a decision," I said. "I'll sign, under my conditions." The relief on Daniel's face was immediate. Leela leaned forward, already reaching for her purse. I raised my hand gently. "Not tonight," I said, "when everything is finalized." She nodded, but I could see impatience flicker across her face like a shadow. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the dark living room and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Not over them, but over myself. The contracts would be signed, yes, just not the ones she expected. The days leading up to the signing were some of the quietest of my life. On the outside, nothing changed. I watered the plants, I folded laundry while watching the evening news, I waved to neighbors, I answered Daniel's calls with the same steady voice I'd always used. But inside, I was listening more carefully than ever. Lila called often now, too often. Each call had the same gentle urgency wrapped in concern. "Have you spoken to your lawyer yet?" "Just checking in. I don't want you feeling overwhelmed. We're only thinking about what's best for everyone." Everyone, I noticed, never included me by name. Daniel, on the other hand, grew quieter. He sounded tired, not angry, not defensive, just worn thin, like someone who had chosen peace over truth for too long and was finally feeling the cost of it. One afternoon, he stopped by alone. He stood in the doorway awkwardly, hands shoved into his coat pockets, eyes drifting around the living room as if seeing it for the first time, or maybe for the last. "Hey, Lila says you're okay with everything," he said. "I am, with the truth." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I poured us both tea and sat across from him at the table. The same table where he'd done his homework, where his father had paid bills, where I'd cried into my hands after that phone call about the wedding. "It means," I said slowly, "that I know when I'm being managed." His shoulders stiffened. "She's just practical," he said. "I know. So am I." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw uncertainty flicker behind his eyes, but it passed quickly. "Everything's already in motion," he said quietly. "Yes," I said, "it is." The signing was scheduled for the following Friday at my lawyer's office. Lila insisted on being there early. She wore a tailored beige suit and carried a leather folder tucked tightly under her arm. Daniel followed a step behind her, his tie slightly crooked, his jaw set. My lawyer greeted us warmly. She shook my hand and offered me a seat at the head of the table. Lila took the chair beside Daniel without being invited. The room felt small, despite its size. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust motes floating lazily in the air. The table was polished to a shine so bright it reflected our faces back at us. 3 people bound by blood and paper, none of us fully honest. My lawyer slid a stack of documents across the table. "These are the agreements we discussed," she said calmly. Lila reached for them immediately. "These aren't the ones she began, flipping pages quickly, her expression tightening with each turn. My lawyer held up a hand. "These are the only documents being signed today." Silence fell like a dropped plate. "What is this?" Lila demanded, tapping a page with a manicured nail. "This isn't a transfer of ownership." "No," my lawyer said. "It's a life estate agreement." Daniel leaned forward. "A what?" I cleared my throat. "It means," I said gently, "that the house remains mine for as long as I live. No one can sell it. No one can force me out. When I'm gone, then it passes on." Lila's face flushed. "That wasn't what we discussed," she snapped. "It's exactly what I discussed," I replied, "with my lawyer, in private." "This is ridiculous," she said, turning to Daniel. "You said she agreed." "I agreed," I said, "to protect myself." Lila stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is manipulation," she said, "after everything we've done to include you." "Include me," I repeated softly. "You banned me from my own son's wedding." Daniel winced. "That had nothing to do with the house," Lila shot back. I met her gaze steadily. "It had everything to do with it." The room went quiet again. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. My lawyer spoke next, her voice firm but calm. "Mrs. Collins is under no obligation to sign anything that compromises her security." Daniel looked between us, his face pale. "Lila," he said, "maybe we should slow down." She stared at him, stunned. "Slow down?" "Yes," he said, standing now. Maybe we should." For the first time since I'd met her, Lila had no words ready. She gathered her folder, her movements sharp and clipped. "I didn't realize I was marrying into distrust," she said coldly. She walked out without another glance. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Daniel sank back into his chair. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I swear I didn't." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I believe you," I said, "but believing doesn't mean surrendering." Tears filled his eyes. He nodded once, slowly. That afternoon, I went home alone. The house felt the same, but I did not. I slept deeply that night, for the first time in weeks, but I knew this wasn't over. Truth rarely ends with paperwork. The fallout came quietly at first. Daniel stopped calling every day, then every other day. Lila didn't call at all. The silence stretched long enough that it began to feel intentional, like a punishment meant to make me second-guess myself. I didn't. Instead, I settled back into my routines with a steadiness that surprised even me. I pruned the fig tree. I repainted the guest room, not for myself, but because I was tired of seeing it through someone else's imagined future. A week later, the phone rang. It was Lila. Her voice was different now, colder, controlled. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm listening," I replied. "Not here," she insisted. She suggested a cafe near their apartment, neutral ground. I agreed. She arrived early, already seated, hands folded tightly around a cup of untouched coffee. When I sat down, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You embarrassed me," she said. "I protected myself," I replied. "You undermined us," she corrected. "No," I said calmly. "I refused to disappear." Her jaw tightened. "You're making things harder than they need to be." "For whom?" I asked. She exhaled sharply, then leaned forward. "Let's be honest. You don't need that house. You're alone. You could downsize, travel, start fresh." "I already have a life," I said. "It's not a placeholder." She scoffed softly. "Everything you have came from the past, and everything you want from me comes from my future," I said. She fell silent then, truly silent, no deflection, no charm. Finally, she said, "Daniel is upset." "So am I said. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as a person who would not bend. When we parted, there was no resolution, just an understanding. A week later, Daniel came alone again. He looked thinner, tired. "We're fighting," he said quietly, standing in the kitchen. "I'm sorry," I said. He shook his head. "No, don't be." He sat down heavily at the table. "She keeps saying I chose you over her." "And what do you think?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think," he said slowly, "that I chose myself for the first time." That was when I knew things had shifted in a way no contract ever could. The next blow came from somewhere I didn't expect. A letter arrived from a real estate firm. Inside was an informal assessment of my property, suggested market value, renovation ideas, potential buyers. I didn't request it. When I called the firm, the agent sounded confused. "Your daughter-in-law asked for it," he said she had authority. That night, I confronted Daniel. He looked genuinely shocked. "I had no idea," he said. "She never mentioned it." But the damage was done. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "This is what happens when people believe something belongs to them before it does." 2 days later, Leela packed her bags. She told Daniel she needed space, that she couldn't live in a marriage where her vision wasn't supported. He didn't stop her. The news traveled fast through the family. Phone calls came from relatives who hadn't checked in for years. Everyone had an opinion. Some said I should have just signed. Others said I was brave. I listened to them all and said very little. Daniel moved into a small apartment nearby. He started coming over for dinner again, hesitant at first, then more relaxed. We didn't talk about Leela much. When we did, it was with sadness, not anger. "I didn't see it," he admitted one night. "Or maybe I didn't want to." "I know," I said. "Love can blur things." Months passed. The house remained quiet but full of memory, full of intention. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the fig tree drop its fruit, Daniel turned to me. I'm glad you didn't give it up. The house. Yourself. I smiled. So am I. Leela filed for divorce not long after. She never asked about the house again. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day that doesn't ask for attention but lingers anyway. Daniel told me over the phone. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight in it, the sound of something ending that he once believed would last forever. I thought I'd feel relief, he said, but mostly I just feel quiet. I know, I replied. Quiet can be a beginning, too. After that, things began to settle. Not suddenly, not neatly, but with the slow patience of dust after a storm. Daniel came over every Sunday again. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we sat in the living room, each of us pretending to read while actually listening to the house breathe. We didn't need to fill the silence anymore. One afternoon, as we were clearing dishes, he stopped and looked around. I never realized how much this place mattered to you, he said, not just as a house, but as proof. Proof of what? I asked. That you lived a whole life before me, he said, and after. His words stayed with me. For years, I had been defined by my roles, wife, mother, widow. I wore them proudly, but I'd forgotten that underneath them was still a woman who deserved agency, safety, and respect. The neighborhood changed slowly, as neighborhoods do. New families moved in, old ones moved out. The fig tree grew wider, heavier with fruit each summer. I learned how to make jam. I gave jars away to neighbors who didn't know the history of that tree, only that the jam tasted like patience. One evening, Daniel brought over a folder. I want you to have this, he said. Inside were copies of the signed life estate documents. He'd had them framed. So you never feel uncertain again, he said. I touched the glass lightly. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. I met his eyes. You did when it mattered. We sat on the porch that night watching the sky darken. Fireflies blinked in the yard like small, deliberate signals. I thought love meant compromise, Daniel said, but I'm learning it also means courage. Yes, especially courage. Lila never contacted me again. Occasionally, I heard things through family whispers, that she'd moved cities, that she'd remarried quickly, that she'd found what she was looking for. I hoped she had. Holding on to anger would have been easy. Letting it go took practice. But each morning when I woke up in my own bed, in my own home, with sunlight spilling across the walls I'd chosen to keep, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt whole. One afternoon, a neighbor asked if I'd ever thought about selling the house now that it was just me. I smiled. No, I said, it's not just me, it's all of me. And that, I realized, was the lesson. Sometimes the people closest to us forget that love does not erase boundaries, that respect is not inherited through marriage, and that age does not make a woman disposable. I wasn't banned from a wedding because I was difficult. I was banned because I could not be controlled. And when asked to give away the ground beneath my feet, I chose instead to stand firmly on it. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small, ordinary moments that didn't announce themselves as important until later, when I looked back and realized they had stitched me back together. It came the morning I rearranged the living room, moving the couch closer to the window so the light fell across it just right. It came when I finally donated my husband's coats, keeping just one scarf tucked into my dresser. It came when I stopped bracing myself every time the phone rang. Daniel started smiling again. Not the polite smile he wore during the worst of his marriage, but the kind that reached his eyes. He took a job offer in another department, one that paid a little less but let him breathe more. On Sundays, he cooked for me now, clumsy and earnest, asking questions about recipes he should have already known. One evening, as we washed dishes together, he said something that stayed with me. I didn't realize how much I was shrinking, he said, until I stopped. I nodded. That's how it usually happens. Life didn't become perfect, it became honest. I joined a local walking group, women my age, some widowed, some divorced, some simply tired of being quiet. We walked in the mornings and talked about everything and nothing, about grandchildren and regrets and the strange freedom that comes when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space. One of them asked me once if I regretted how things ended with Lila. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that it had to be a battle, I said, but I don't regret standing my ground. Because the truth was, that moment, the one where I stayed silent while contracts were drawn, while expectations were built on the assumption of my surrender, that moment changed me. Not into someone hard, but into someone clear. I understood then that dignity doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like silence. And sometimes it looks like knowing exactly when to say no and meaning it. The house still creaks at night. The stairs still complain in the same spots. The fig tree still drops fruit whether I'm ready or not. But now, when I walk through these rooms, I don't feel like I'm waiting for permission to exist here. This house is not leverage. It is not inheritance bait. It is not a bargaining chip. It is a life fully lived, and I am still living it. Closing/audience connection. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with shouting or cruelty. They come quietly, wrapped in smiles, paperwork, and the assumption that you will step aside without a fuss. I wasn't banned from a wedding because I wasn't unloving. I was banned because I wouldn't disappear. And when asked to give away the roof over my head, I chose instead to give myself something far more valuable: respect. So let me ask you, gently and honestly, what would you have done if you were in my place? If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or maybe of yourself, thank you for sitting with me until the end. Your time, your support, and your voice matter more than you know. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more stories like this told from the heart, don't forget to support the channel and subscribe. Until next time, take care of yourself.